100%.
Yeah. It's interesting how the human brain works like that, right? How you can be so brilliant in one way and struggle so much in another way.
I can relate.
All right. Well, here's how it goes. We're live. There's no preface. There's no anything. James Geering, Behind the Shield podcast. We're out here doing it, and I appreciate you for doing the show. I did your show a while back, and now it's time to flip the script and let me talk to you and scrape some stuff out of your mind, hopefully.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. We were just talking before we kind of rolled in how nice it is sometimes when you interview a fellow podcaster, because they kind of understand the ins and outs of how to make these things run a little bit more smoothly. And so this was very easy to set up, and I'm very appreciative of that. So there's so much to talk about. I follow everything that you're doing, and I know you're very passionate about the schedule change. That's the thing that I really want to dive deep into in this conversation, is the 24/72 schedule, which is a huge thing that you're talking about constantly, and a huge thing that I'm extremely interested in. But before that, we have to peel back the layers of who is the man behind the microphone, James Geering. So I know you immigrated to the US in 2002. Tell me about life prior to that.
So I'll give you the cliff notes. It's been quite an interesting adventure up to this point. But I grew up on a farm in England, a little farm boy, dreaming of a lot of things actually that are American. You know, I was enamored by Hollywood and American films and The Karate Kid and Back to the Future, and I thought those guys were cool. And if I was cool, then the girls would like me. But I wasn't cool, and the girls didn't like me. I had three. It's interesting. I had three aspirations. I wanted to be a firefighter, I wanted to be a doctor, and I wanted to be a stuntman. And when I was young, in the kind of annual physicals that they do at schools, they told me that I was colorblind. And they said, you can never be a pilot, you can never be a firefighter, and it was taken off the table completely. And, when you are told something as a child by a person in a white coat and a stethoscope, that's gospel to you. So I ended up going down the medical route. Well, ended up beginning the medical route, but then I didn't realize that the chemistry and the physics that I was really good at the school level became high-level mathematics when you advance, and I was just lost. So we were talking before we hit record, how people can be really good in one area and not in another. Math is just not my thing. Street math, medic math, pump math is fine, but the high-level stuff, the algebra, where it just didn't make any sense anymore. So anyway, long story short, I just didn't get out of what we call A levels. So it would be kind of like the AS level here. And so then I fumbled around, fell in love with a girl. She was at a drama school. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to get into drama school. Can't act to save my life, but somehow I managed to get in there. And then along that path, I realized that, again, I was the world's worst actor, hands down, but I was good at the stage fighting because I was a martial artist. So fast forward a few more years, I end up getting hired in Universal Studios Japan as a stuntman in the theme park there to open the Terminator 2 show. When I was there, I met an American girl. My previous, girlfriend had kind of fallen apart. Not her, that would have been awkward, but the relationship. So I ended up marrying this American girl, moving to the US, and right before I was about to come here, a copy of Muscle and Fitness, they featured a Miami-Dade firefighter, and I happened to buy that magazine. And I was reading this, and I was going, "This is everything I want to do. This is a firefighter. This is a doctor, a street doctor." So when I moved to Orlando, 5 miles down the road was the Mid-Florida Fire College. So that was the beginning. So it was a bizarre route where I ended up becoming a stuntman, becoming a firefighter, and then becoming a medic, which I would argue is the cooler version of a doctor anyway.
Yeah. So there's one big detail in the middle of that that I'm fascinated by. That you're in England and you get hired in Japan. How the heck does that happen?
I left a little bit out. So I worked every summer in summer camps in America. It's like a exchange program. So university students can go for the summer, and the kids get exposed to this kind of international camp counselors. And I taught water sports and martial arts, and it was kind of a cool place. It was a Jewish performing arts camp. So most of the focus was on musicals and plays and, recitals. But where I got to kind of be involved was the kids then were just so burnt out from, learning lines and choreography, and they just wanted to come down and learn how to water ski or, swim so it was a really interesting perspective. But when I was there, I met my girlfriend that she was actually English. And a lot of us in the UK would take a gap year and travel. So we bought a round the world ticket. I think it had like 7 or 9 stops. It was £1,000, which for all the way around the planet, stopping multiple times was amazing. But when we got to Sydney, Australia, and this was after I graduated drama school, Universal Studios was looking for performers, because in Japan, obviously, you're trying to portray all these, American film stars, and your average Japanese person obviously was Japanese. So unless there was someone that actually needed to be Asian specifically, they needed to cast different, colors and heights and all that. So in Sydney was when I happened to just open a paper and they were looking for them. I'm like, well, what have I got to lose? And with obviously the background in the martial arts, but also the way I looked at the time, one of the roles they were looking for was to double Robert Patrick, who plays the T-1000, this guy.
Yeah.
And it was, again, in the live show, not the film. And so I just happened to be, right look, right place, right time with the skill set as well. So that was how I found myself in Japan, which then, led to all the other doors opening.
Wow. Crazy. It's crazy how life works like that, right? Where you find yourself in one place at the right time and the right moment for the right opportunity, and you step into it, and the rest is history. It's kind of crazy. Did you have to, I know you mentioned that you were a terrible actor, or maybe potentially still are a terrible actor.
Still, definitely.
Did you have to do any acting inside the stunt show in terms of dialogue or anything, or is it all physicality?
In the Terminator show, no, but I did a few. I just finished doing the Bourne stunt show. It was the last one, I did just up to about 3 years ago. Ironically, in the same venue in Orlando that the Terminator show was in when they closed it down.
Oh, interesting.
But I did the pirate dinner adventure. So if you think of medieval times, but a pirate version. And so, yeah, that was dialogue, that was singing, that was
all kinds
of stuff. So, yeah, I felt really comfortable in the sword fights, and then when I had to stand on the side and get people going, I just would like die inside every time. But it's forcing out your comfort zone, so it was worth it.
The reason I ask is I was wondering if they were going to make you throw on an American accent for the show, and so I was going to press you to hear if you could still do it, but it sounds like you got out of it.
Yeah, I played an Englishman, obviously a pirate in that particular one. But yeah, I had to, the very first thing I ever did was a student video when I was out of drama school trying to look for work. And I had to put on a Swedish accent. And the lines were, there'd been a break-in and some things had been taken, and his name is Bjorn. And he said, at least my stereo is okay. And after then I sound like, all right, I sound like a porn star. That's not going to work either. So
that's not bad. I'll take that. That's better than any accent I can throw on. So obviously drama school must have did something for you, right?
Well, also the Jerky Boys. The one American one I could do was like a Camp New Yorker. I don't know if you ever heard those, but
no.
Yeah, but that'd probably be offensive these days if I did that. So I'm not even going to try it.
Well, honestly, it just depends on the demographic you're doing the impression of, right? Most of them could probably be seen as offensive unless you're really good at it and nail it. Because you really, to do an impression, you have to really hyperbolize, the culture in some way, shape, or form, probably to capture it. But man, Absolutely. That's really funny. Okay, so you're now working in Japan, right? In the T2 show. And then you make your way back over to America. Now you're in Florida. But at what point do you reinvestigate this colorblindness situation to see if this is actually a limitation like you thought it was?
When we said a minute ago that it's amazing how you can be really good at one thing and so awful at the other, I realized why I wasn't supposed to be in law enforcement, because it took me to be about 25 years old to realize that I could see colors. And
oh my God.
So that was pretty much it. When I had the realization, like, I can see colors, maybe, just maybe that test isn't accurate. So that was it. So when I challenged the the color vision test in the academy, you know, for the medical to get into fire school, I just said, look, I'm not going to be able to see half the things in that book, but tell me, you know, anything in this room, I'll tell you what color it is. And that was it. They were like, all right, you're good. So my wife now is an optometrist, a doctor of you know, eye doctor.
Oh my God.
And she said, yeah, the books just are there to give you an indication of color vision deficit. And then you can go through and see what level with different tests. But so there's a lot of people out there that, you know, at the first hurdle fell because, oh, you've got this condition or you're colorblind or whatever. Now I always tell people, look, you know, don't let that discourage you. Find people that have found a way around it and then, you know, keep going, because there's a lot of dreams that have been shattered by, you know, medical practitioners around the world, especially in schools.
Wow, that's fascinating. So the reality is that you have some level of color vision deficiency, but you actually can see a gradient of colors. That's the closer to the truth.
Just think about, no one's either 20/20 or completely blind. You know, there's all these spectrums in the middle. A lot of us are what they call red-green deficient. So, you know, if you show me deep reds, or, you know, I find even like navy and black hard to disseminate, then yeah, fashion designer maybe would be a struggle. But you're telling me, hey, the red car is the one with the, you know, the patients in, well, I can see the red car. But if you say, you know, the scarlet car and the, you know, then you're
like, dang it.
You know, exactly. So yeah, so there's a big difference between, you know, can you function with this, and is it truly going to be dangerous not to, you know, to have that person in? And if you completely, I forget, chromo something, whatever the term is, when you just see black and white, then yeah, maybe it's going to be a bit more challenging. But you know, for a lot of people, it isn't that. It's way closer to normal vision.
So at that point, you are in Orlando. I know at some point, then you make the leap to the opposite coast, right? And then back. So what's up with that? How does that happen?
This is the precursor to everything I do now, because you think about it, so many of us join a department, especially back in, you know, when I got hired, which was 2004, you know, a lot of people joined and they just stayed their whole career and they retired at 20 or 25. So I ended up having a very gypsy career. And it was, the backstory was my wife at the time, who had met in Universal. She was a performer. So I trained in Orlando, but then she really kind of was pursuing fame. So first she wanted to go down to Miami, which is when I worked for Hialeah. Amazing department that set the bar, I mean, ridiculously high. And I found out since that our class was kind of unique. It was literally like a, you know, Navy SEALs Hell Week compared to some of the other academies they've held. But I mean, it was non-cert class, but half of us were certified. So while the other half went to school, they kept us on the drill ground for 3 months and just beat the living hell out of us in a good way, in a proactive, you know, progressive, well thought out way. So I loved everything about the training, but then when you got in, you saw the lack of support that city got. They were paid literally half what Miami-Dade were paid, and these guys worked. I mean, they ran and ran and ran. So I got so much respect for, you know, for everyone that stayed. But my ex now, she wanted to go to Hollywood. She wanted to go to California and pursue the dream there. So I tested for Anaheim, and was flying, you know, whatever it is, 2,500 miles for each leg of the tests, and got in. I got hired. And, you know, I think obviously the little bit of experience coupled with the fact this guy's willing to fly across the country to test for us, I mean, I'm sure that helped. But that was another phenomenal department. So I saw a very under-supported one with great people and great culture in Hialeah. Then I saw, you know, just an all-round great department in Anaheim, and I was a tillerman on a truck company there. So California, you know, cutting roofs, all that stuff. So that was amazing. But then we had a little boy. And when my son was born, my ex wanted to move back to Florida to be close to a family. And, you know, I think most of us would look in the mirror and say that no matter how much it pains you, your family still comes first, even if it means leaving your dream department. So that's what took me out east. And then I found out that when I was at the station, someone else was in my home. And so that marriage didn't work. And then now I'm a single dad. So then I moved departments one more time, because I was just getting mandatory over and over and over again. So when I'm talking about these work weeks and stuff, I've done the West Coast schedule. I've been in the department that's unending mandatory. And you can't tell a single dad that he can't go home to his kid. Or you can't tell this single dad, at least. So I ended up, after 5 years, moving to Reedy Creek, now the district, which is the one that protects Disney, which I gave up fire. My ego was crushed, but the most important thing was my son. They had fully staffed department and they had a 3-week caddy day. So it was, that last time was when, moved for that reason. And then I might as well just carry on with the transition. Within there, though, the culture wasn't good. And it wasn't just that you weren't going to fight fire. There was a lot of complacency. And so after 5 years of trying to make it better, even interviewing Jocko, and he's like, well, you just go up the chain of command. And I was like, Jocko, sometimes every rung of the ladder is groomed by a certain group and you're going to get the same person. It's not going to change. And so that was really, and the podcast was 2 years old by that point, but that's what ultimately made me leave the fire service. Is like, all right, well, I'm just going to change it from the outside. No one can tell me to sit down and shut up then. So that was 8 years ago.
And so that's 8 years ago. The podcast is what, 10 years old?
Yeah.
Right. What becomes the catalyst for that? Like at a certain point, 10 years ago, you're definitely on the cutting edge of fire service podcasts. You're in terms of probably one of the first people to market, relatively on the front wave of podcasts in general. They weren't really that huge at that point. And so you said, I have a voice. I want to talk. What's the catalyst?
Well, this is the interesting thing, because at the moment people are like, oh yeah, you're the guy that talks about 24/72. I'm the guy that talks about how the funerals and the divorces are unacceptable. And if that involves work weeks or PFAS-free gear, whatever the thing is, that was the mission. But I was listening to Barbell Shrugged, which the original crew they had were a bunch of powerlifters, Mike Bledsoe and I forget the other two guys. And they had a guy called Dr. Kirk Parsley on the show, who's a Navy SEAL, pre 9/11, went to med school, came back as a West Coast SEAL team's physician. And very long story, very short, about a year in, he's like, what is going on? These are supposed to be like the most, uber athletes in the tactical space, and their blood work is awful. They look awful. And he started seeing a pattern where they were all on Ambien. And he took a deep dive into the world of sleep medicine. And he was like, oh, well, here we go. Testosterone depletion, mental health issues. All the things. So he actually got their command to shift the way they did training. Obviously, when they were on deployment and they had to go at night, they had to go at night. But to really emphasize the rest and recovery, to emphasize, getting as much normal sleep at night as possible. And I'm driving, whatever it was, 10.5 years ago now, listening to this going, why are we not talking about this? This is everything that's killing us. The cancer, the autoimmune disease, the addiction, the suicides, all related to this. Not the only thing, but it's a massive amplifier of it. And so initially I just looked for a podcast. I'm like, okay, well, let me find a firefighter health podcast and I'll start listening to that. But there wasn't one, not on health specifically. We had fire engineering. We had a couple other ones that were knocking about. And so they say, if you can't find it, then there's your sign. And that was it. So, and around that time as well, let me see. Yeah, just prior to that, I'd been to 6 funerals in 2 years of my friends, my fellow firefighters. One, there was only Carl was 23 or 24. Oh. And so, that was the other thing. It's like, no one's talking about this. We go to the funerals, we play the bagpipes, we do the last call, we ring the bell, everyone's sad, and then we go back to work, do the same exact thing that we did before. So that was the real mission, is like, all right, I'm tired of just burying people and nothing changing. And if I'm really going to, call it out, there are large organizations, whether it's unions, whether it's chiefs associations, whatever it is, that really haven't grabbed this by the throat and run with it either, So there are people within those organizations, of course, that are trailblazers that are trying to, but, I saw the red tape of a lot of these places, and people say, oh, we've got to change legislation. No. You go ahead, go change legislation. But in the meantime, we're just going to get departments to change, because every department is autonomous and they can. So that was a big thing. But it was then building a free library. Nothing I have is behind a paywall at all. Everything is free globally of information to build a case on all these different things, whether it is, the PFAS, and we had Rob Ballot and Diane Cotter and all these people, whether it's the work week, and we got these sleep medicine experts from around the world and the military, and whatever the topic was. And now people can just hit play and no one's going to interrupt them and no one's going to say, oh yeah, but they're just going to get to listen to someone who their life's work is this thing. Like a lot of us are, I am a strength and conditioning coach, but I don't do it 5 days a week. It's not my only goal. Therefore, I'm not great at it, the same with all these other areas. So it was getting outside the fire service as well and going to the world's leading experts, the people who everyone else are learning from, and then presenting the issues that we have in the fire service and then getting them to give their perspective. And, almost 1,300 episodes later, here we are.
Crazy. What was it like at the beginning, right? Like I'm like 80 episodes or so in now, like your 1,300 episodes is a staggering quantity. What do you remember about those early days trying to find guests and get people to do the show? And I would imagine that the resistance you felt then is very different than the resistance you feel now when trying to book people and curate kind of these conversations. What do you remember about that?
So it's interesting because in a lot of areas, it was easier back then because, as you said, podcasts weren't that big. I thought I was so late to the game. It's so funny, but also people were still reading emails. There wasn't this white noise, and I get it. We're just so bombarded with junk mail and social media and, all the things that it's so hard now to just stand out and be like, hey, this is coming from this place of altruism. I'd love to get you on. You're an expert. Because if you get that in front of a person, they'd be like, well, that sounds great. Yeah, I would like to most of the time. Or I'm too busy, but can we do it in 6 months? Mm-hmm. Back then, because it's quite funny. When I did sales in London years ago, and it was literally cold calling sales, standing on the street, kind of doing it for a promotional company to get people in the gyms and hair salons and paintball. And their whole thing was, if you ask 10 people, one will say yes. And it could be you ask 90 before 10 say yes, but the ratio was 1 to 10. So I'd sent out about 10 emails to Sebastian Junger, Tim Kennedy, Kirk Parsley, all these people. And I'm like, okay, well, if one of them says yes, then great. That's episode 1 at least. Well, all 10 of them said yes. And I was like, okay. And it was because, they hadn't had a firefighter reach out and say, hey, we'd like to talk to you from the Green Berets, from, the military embedded journalism, whatever background they had. And so that was what was nice, is if you reached out to someone, usually they got it, the individual themselves, and then they could decide, do I want to do this? Do I not? And I've got so much admiration because remember, I had no episodes. Mm-hmm. So these people lent their time to come on the show and tell their stories with a guy that had, so it wasn't about them. So it wasn't adding to their platform. Mm-hmm. They were just actually caring about this community, which I think is beautiful. Today, on one hand, it's amazing because you can imagine with almost 1,300 guests, there's a lot of people now that will reach out to me that were a guest themselves. Say, hey, I've got this friend, he's a former CIA operative, he's written a book, I'm like, well, yeah, I'd love to get him on. I mean, that mm-hmm. sounds amazing, So I get a lot of that, which makes it a lot easier. But when I'm trying to reach out to someone new that I don't have a connection with, you realize just these people just get bombarded now. And even, I'm sure you get this, even like, the podcasts themselves, we get hit by these ChatGPT generated emails. I was listening to your recent email episode with Andy, and I was struck by how prevalent the conversation. Like,
yeah. Nobody wrote this.
No, exactly. Yeah. So you're sifting through all that shit just to get to, So I totally understand it, but it's a shame because the white noise and the number of podcasts, which is great. I think the more the merrier, but it has definitely diluted the ability to just simply connect with someone and say, this is the heart of this podcast. This is why I want you to come on. I really am, a fan of your work. I think you'd be invaluable to this audience. And that's what's made it difficult. So it's amazing looking back now 10 years and seeing how gracious some of these early guests were. And I've had them on numerous times since again. But yeah, I think if you're starting out now, that's the one challenge. Is just there's so much out there that it's people are drowning information. And how do you stand out and be like, okay, this is coming from a place not from self-promotion, not to sell my thing here on the side, but just simply to make the world a little bit better. And it's a hard message to convey these days.
How much effort and time do you put into the idea of curating a storyline, like episode to episode, versus like just trying to produce an individual episode along the way?
I mean, the conversations have been the same since day one. I've added some things. I've heard people on other podcasts, God, that's a really good way of asking that, or that's an interesting perspective. I personally take a lot more time now in early life because I realize just how important that is. It's, basically why we're wearing a uniform is because of the first 18, 20, 25 years. But I never know what I hit bullet points. So I know chronologically, things about the person, where they worked, what came first, if they've got anything that they are writing or doing now. But that's it. I'll have a sheet of, 8 bullet points, and then 2 hours, it's just completely free. So the only real storytelling is then using, which again is a good thing now with AI, is just trying to find a couple of really good sound bites from the show to kind of hook people in. Because it's a 2-hour conversation normally, but a lot of us obviously have got a long commute as well. So it's amazing how engaging it can be. And the guests, I'm sure you've heard this too. We're talking for 2 hours, 3 hours, and it felt like an hour. It's like, exactly. That's what happens when two humans just connect without any distractions. So
that's one of my favorite things about the podcasting medium, right? Like, even if it wasn't for sponsors and ads and whatever, right? The business that is the podcast, right? I extremely rarely, if not only exclusively during podcasts, have moments where I just am purely connected, right? It's me and you, and it's just us, and the rest of the world is dark, right? With the exception of maybe like going out to dinner with my wife or something like that. It really is like, it's such a wonderful thing, because everything else in the world these days is, hey, we're talking, but also the TV's on, or hey, we're talking, but I'm checking my email or my phone or something like that. But there's just these moments that happen, and you get into this weird, like almost flow state where you look down and you go, oh my God, it's been 2 hours. Holy crap. And you've just learned all this new information or discovered something new about someone you knew already, or learned something. It's like, it's such a wonderful medium. And I think that that's one of the reasons that it resonates with people so much, right? When they're able to, from their car on their own, on their drive to work, feel that connection. Because I do think that that's what humankind is lacking the most right now, which is that person to person human connection. Like, I see you, you see me. And like in the podcast space, when it's done correctly, a person from their own car by themselves can still grasp onto that a little bit.
This is what I love. I always say, like, I'm the most selfish person on the planet because I get to ask the questions that I want to ask. This is, what an amazing thing. You sit down with some of these people, like Dr. Edith Eger, who's an Auschwitz survivor. She just passed away a few months ago, but she became a psychologist. Like, I got to sit down, virtually and talk to her. What an incredible thing. So then I'm trying to think, obviously, well, what would everyone want to know? It's not just me. But now you get to be the third person in that room, the audience member when you're in that car. And what I love as well is that so often, say you're around a firehouse table and someone said, yeah, well, I tried psychedelics. Immediately, drugs are bad. Especially a few years ago. Well, when you're just driving, you don't have that response. You might do, but I'm just going to listen. And then you hear, let's say, this Navy SEAL start talking about their darkest times and the CTEs and all these things. And then they start talking about, the ayahuasca or the ibogaine, and then the results they had and how their marriage started healing. And you get to the station and you're like, oh, I get it now. Whereas if you just shut it down, in person, you never would have heard the rest of the thing that makes it make sense. 2472 is the same thing. 4896 is the best. Click. Okay, well, how about if you just didn't say anything and listen to people that know what they're talking about and let them tell you the whole story? Maybe at the end of that, you go, oh, actually, I never thought of it that way. And that is the power of podcasting. It's not anyone trying to persuade anyone. You're literally interviewing someone who, again, is a subject matter expert. And whether it's, in this case, it's 2472, someone in sleep medicine talking about the lunacy of working more than 24 hours, or a department that's made the change is saying, no, we literally have, 10 times as many people applying to us now. And our classes are full of, paramedics and 15-year veterans with USAR experience. Like, no, this isn't a debate. These are actually people, showing you the evidence. So I think that's the other really powerful thing. You get to be present when you're actually the interviewer or the guest, but the person listening has to allow, unless they hit stop and they're, oh, this is rubbish, and just turn it off. They have to let these thought process continue, like let someone really finish. And that's what you do really well in your interviews. And I try to do the same in mine, is let the guest completely finish their thought process, because then the listener goes, oh, okay, well now you said that makes more sense, and that's it. Because we're, as a culture, we're conditioned to just, what's the right way of saying this? There's a lot of entities out there that want us to have this fast information and this, and get angry before a commercial breaks. Oh, I can't wait till Fox comes back so I can find out what that guy did. Meanwhile, you're getting sold stuff, and that's how they actually make their money. So, that knee-jerk anger reflex is conditioned through a lot of our media. So I think what podcast is the antithesis of that, where no one's trying to make you angry. It's just two people talking, and they're being honest, period, the end.
Mm-hmm. So in that vein, I'm talking about giving people the space to share their opinions, whether you agree or not. What is something that you believed fervently 10 years ago that you've changed your mind on?
I mean, so many things. Can you imagine how arrogant I would be if I said nothing? I was right about everything.
Yeah.
Hard from the yard.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, I'll give you a few.
Yeah.
I mean, firstly, the sleep. It wasn't I was anti it before, but when you're post 9/11 fire and you come in and you're testing against thousands of people for one of 15 jobs, when you get the job, you have zero questions. I hope you make it through probation. And then now I need to show that I'm not a yad, year and a day, so you're just focusing on being a good firefighter. And this is why I understand a lot of the yap from the younger guys, and maybe not so much the people getting hired now, because I mean, they're giving away jobs at the moment. And I'm not being snide. They just literally are. Anyone could get hired at the moment if you have your certs. But when, so it was more that it wasn't I was thinking anything negative about what we're talking about today, but it's more I just wasn't thinking about it, full stop. And that is what's changed immensely. Understanding how preventable so many of the things that we're dying from are, and not just the death, the divorces, the fractured relationships with kids. I mean, all the things. And so that was a huge aha. I was like, oh, wow. If we start identifying the things that are wrong, then you can start fixing them. And that's being misconstrued by some people. Oh, everyone's just talking negatively about the fire service and it's the greatest job in the world and just don't question anything and just keep coming to work. Then you fix nothing. Yeah. No one's saying it's a bad job. If it's something you love, then you're going to work to make it better. That is the very nature of loving something. So another interesting one, though, and I'll go kind of off left field a little bit, was the way I view suicide. Because when you have literally interviewed hundreds of people who either were at that point and something stopped them, and it's amazing hearing all the stories of, divine intervention or whatever, you perceive that to be. But there's people that be on the show that went through with it and they survived. So, pretty powerful testimony from all these groups. And you couple that with the psychologists I've had on the show, with the sleep medicine experts who I've had on the show, you realize that the way that we were told suicide was, and obviously some of this comes from interpretation of holy text. I don't think it's actually, I don't think it the way people talk about it has any compassion or empathy. So I wouldn't say that was actually at the core of that holy text, but we were told it was cowardly. It was selfish. How could you think of your kids? And you actually see where these people are at and you listen to them. They, at that point, and it's what's the right word of saying this? God, I'm blanking on the term. But anyway, the sum of numerous contributing factors. So everything from unaddressed childhood trauma, sleep deprivation, organizational betrayal, alcohol, side effects of psych meds, head trauma. I mean, it's this perfect storm of all these unique elements. It's not one thing. It's just what we get wrong in the mental health conversation in our profession. Oh, it's because James was at that wreck and that baby died. Mm-hmm. That's that much. There's lots of people that see that and they're fine with that. They don't like it, but so they get to this, all these pieces come together to create this perfect storm, and the mind literally becomes miswired. And now their reality is shifted to the point where they truly believe that they are a burden to the people that they love. They are the reason for their loved one's pain. And if you're in a profession where you've said that you will die for a complete stranger, and your true belief, because your mind is miswired, is that if you just take yourself out, your family won't be in pain anymore, then, if there's a community that's going to do it, it's us, it's the military, it's law enforcement. And it's so sad because to a healthy mind, of course, that makes no sense, but it's not a healthy mind. Mm-hmm. This is, the very core of being a human being, being a mammal, is to, grow to adult size, reproduce, and then protect your child. So it's in our nature to survive. So if you go up on a tall building and you kind of feel that almost like invisible hand pushing you away from the edge, well, if you think about this miswiring, now it's gone behind you and it's pushing you towards the edge. So that was the biggest thing, is understanding that it's a cumulative effect of all these different things, like death by 1,000 cuts. And if you can either within yourself see the verbiage, hear the voice that you're a burden, you're just that shame and guilt conversation. And you should, if you just get rid of yourself, then your family and your kids will be happier. If you start hearing that, that's a huge red flag. That's the time to ask for help. If you hear your friends saying things like that, I'm a piece of shit, et cetera, that is a huge red flag for us. And you don't see that on any of the mental health, bulletins. Mm-hmm. And so when I realized that, it also tragically made me realize that the people that we've lost to suicide at that point were probably terrified. But it was a courageous act because they truly believed at that point that was a solution. And it wasn't for them. Of course, there's an ending of the suffering and the sadness and the pain as well. But it was a selfless act. And so putting compassion and empathy into the people that we've lost rather than judging them. And then the same with the people that are starting to struggle, and pull them back where you can actually get that voice to be quietened again and get them to start thinking clearly. That's the huge part of the mental health conversation you don't have anyone talking about. And a big part of that is sleep deprivation as well. That, I always tell people we use sleep deprivation deliberately for special forces selection, interrogation, and torture. That's it. You know what I mean? But then people will turn their heads, oh, there's nothing to do with that. And yeah, of course there is in mental health. We know it's proof. We use it deliberately to stress people out and get them to crumble. So when you identify all these areas, now you can start picking them apart and saying, well, we can fix the work week. We can put, mental health counseling at the front door and talk about the reason that you're even wearing a uniform. You've probably been through some stuff as a kid, and let's start working through that on day one, the same way we was going to PT. We can talk about, alcohol and talk about alternatives. We can look at psychedelics, all kinds of areas. And now you're picking apart this Jenga tower, and now you're nowhere near crisis anymore. And most importantly, you're now building up performance. And this is what kills me with I did 25 years and I was okay. No, you did 25 years as a pretty shitty firefighter if you're working these hours. Yeah. So we don't want to stay shit. We want you to get better. We want you to perform at a high level. And how many of these line of duty deaths were also partly to do with sleep deprivation? The wrecks at the intersections, falling off the aerial, getting lost in primary search, so now, like I've gone on a tangent, I apologize. But yeah, the point being, when you can identify these issues, you can pick them apart, you can address them, you can make a higher performing firefighter that's going to have less chance of addiction and suicide and cancer and heart disease and divorce and all the other things. So by looking at this forensically with a compassionate and empathetic lens, we're gonna steer the fire department in an area it's never been before, and it's a very, very positive area, a high performing, high longevity profession that's going to pull young people back in and be excited about it again. Mm-hmm.
So I have a lot of questions on the tail end of that, but I also want to go back and talk about something you talked about in the middle of that, which is kind of this, the misconception about these mental health problems. And so for reference, I'm sure most of my audience knows, if they've been around, but a year ago, I would have been almost a month into my inpatient mental health program, right? I was out at the Center of Excellence. And one of the most profound things I took away from that in terms of understanding the mental health crisis was the idea that almost exclusively zero, I mean, I can think of maybe one example of a person that had an acute stress that lunged them into the program. Everyone was cumulative. Every single person was childhood trauma plus teenage trauma plus 50 calls plus marriage problems plus alcohol problem plus nobody was there. Like I said, except for there's one person I can think of off the top of my head that like had one unbelievably heinous call that launched them into the program. But everyone else, we're talking, I don't know, hundreds of people I probably interacted in my 38 days there. Everyone was cumulative. It was all a sum of their parts. And so it's so, and I am totally guilty of this 100%. I was wrong and I have been corrected that you see someone go off on a call and then they go on a run, they have a bad run and they go, oh, they now they need to go to treatment. Now they need to go off the job because of this call. And I was like, I've been on a call like that before. It's no big deal, right? But you like, and like, so that's one problem because you're not looking at it in totality of like the human being that experienced that call, not just the call itself, right? You don't know what the 1,000 things that happened to that moment where that call was impactful for them. And re-changing that paradigm in my brain when I looked at first responder PTSD, it drastically changed the way I view it. Like now, any call could be the call. Literally, I feel like there's not a call you go on from stub toe at 2 a.m. to like the worst thing you can imagine that couldn't be the straw that breaks the camel's back. It just, at any point, it could be the one for anyone. And in that, you find yourself lending a lot more grace to the people around you that are struggling, because it's no longer a comparative, well, I've done this and you only did that. It's about, man, I wish I knew you well enough to understand why this was the thing that hurt you, right? Because there's so much depth to that conversation in comparison to the surface level. Well, that's not as bad as the other thing that I did and I'm fine, right? But for some reason, I think we're trending in the right direction, but the fire service still has this comparative mindset of, well, why are you bad when I'm good and we went to the same thing? And they're not reviewing the whole history of how someone came to be in a given moment.
I'll give you a perfect analogy. I hurt my back 10 years ago, and it was lifting a hypervent patient into the rig, into the ambulance. You know, we treated him. It seemed like that's what it was. He wanted to go to hospital. Okay. And where we parked, it was just kind of on a ramp in front of one of the resorts at Disney. The way that it was, they didn't have a dump in their rescue. So the way it was, I kind of had to like arch my back to get a little bit higher. And I just heard a snap. And, you know, I've been a martial artist my whole life. I'm not, you know, completely pathetic when it comes to pain. And I'm like, okay, that really wasn't good. Whatever just happened. Still drove him to the hospital, got him out. And then when we, you know, once we offloaded the patient, I told my partner, like, I gotta go get this checked out. I've done something really bad to my back. So anyway, very long story, very short. If you looked at that event, like, oh, I can't believe James, you know, hurt his back lifting a 180-pound panic attack patient. But that wasn't the case. It was at that point, what was I, 42. So that was, you know, 12, 13 years in the fire service with the shift work and, you know, all the strength and conditioning I did to be a good firefighter and the martial arts and the stunts and everything. And it was just like you said, it was a straw that broke the camel's back, literally. And so if you just judge a person by that moment, then you're completely missing. All right, well then just think about the value to the department. Someone gets hurt at, you know, 14, you know, 15, 20 years. You go, oh, I can't believe, he tore his bicep getting the hose off the rig. Yeah, but he or she has worked for you for 20 years without being hurt. But with the sleep deprivation thing, with the musculoskeletal injury, if you know anything about, strength training, you know that the building is when you sleep. You break the muscle down and then it comes back a little bit stronger, to put it very simply. If you're not sleeping every third day over 10, 15, 20 years, it's not if you get hurt, you will get hurt. It's a foregone conclusion, which is, again, back to the 2472, making a dent on that as well. But it's the same with the mental health. You got all the stuff that happened when you were young. You got the cumulative elements of the actual cause themselves. You got the interaction of the cause and what's going on in your personal life. You just lost a beloved grandparent and you just went on a 80-year-old, MI. And then you've got the sleep deprivation, which is literally breaking you down, and you can't process trauma if you're not sleeping. That's when the brain processes the day's thoughts. So when you add all these up, again, it's this Jenga tower. Now, there are beautiful things that can start bringing them back down again. But if you're in a department that's just not, acknowledging that at all, it most likely will be a lesser event that actually topples that tower. So it's a really interesting point for people to understand.
Mm-hmm. So that really transitions me into my next kind of thought, which is, this is going to be an obvious thought, but I'm interested to get your take on it, which is every department on the earth would say we want highly capable, highly skilled, highly physically fit, highly healthy, all the positive attributes of a ready for performance firefighter. Why is it that the system itself seems so opposed to making the changes to make that reality possible?
Let's talk about fire service myths. And this is the beautiful thing. I don't normally speak. I actually put in an app to speak at FDIC this year next year for the first time ever. And we'll see if it gets accepted. But I just, I don't tour. I don't do classes because everything I have is open source and it's online. Why would I go to somewhere when they can just watch one of the podcasts? Yeah. But there's one when I talk about the 2472 and when the first slide says, well, whose fault is it? And I asked the room, whose fault is it? What we're at now, retention crisis, recruitment crisis, all the disease. And they look around, then the penny drops and they go, is it all of us? I'm like, yeah, every single one of us, from the public to the probie to, all the way through the ranks, to the chief, to the administrators, to the mayor, all of us, everyone has a part. But the easiest one to really get most people to understand is, well, let's start with us. And again, post 9/11, a lot of us were like, same in the military, just send me. That's all I've got. I got no questions. Well, if you look at the way we put the work week, we say, I work 1 day on, 2 days off. And I have this great schedule. I only work 10 days a month. And we tell our family, we tell our neighbors, we tell our friends. And then on the same time, you have all the nosediving of our profession. Like, wait a second, these two don't seem to line up. So then you do the maths. Like, you ask yourself, okay, what is a work week? What is a work day everywhere else? Well, it's an 8-hour day with a 1-hour lunch, so 9 hours. So an 8-hour work day. So a 24-hour shift is 3 8-hour shifts crammed together. So actually it's 3 days on, 1 day off. Because if you think about the third part of that 24-hour shift is from midnight to shift change, and you say that was your day off. It wasn't your day off. You woke up in the fire station after running calls through the night, So you only had that next day is actually off. So if you, and this really shocked everyone in the room, if you now extrapolate that to a year, a 40-hour employee, if my memory serves me right, worked like 280 days a year. If you factor in an 8-hour day. If you do that for a 56-hour employee, 24/48 or a version of, you work 364 days a year.
Oh, wow.
So
crazy.
The math ain't mathin', as they say.
Yes.
So this is the biggest problem when we say about change, because we believe our own fairy tales. We have the greatest job in the world. Now, the greatest calling, 1,000%. People, kind of rebuttal stuff I say is like, well, this is the greatest job in the world. Well, I gave up my pension and my benefits to do what I do to help this profession. So I'm pretty sure I understand how much this profession means, because I gave up everything that supports me and pays the bills to keep trying to fix the fire service. So trust me, I get it. But we have to debunk these myths that we've told ourselves. If you had your favorite NHL team, NBA, World Cup soccer team, whatever it is, football, I can't use the word soccer, football team.
Oh, we got you. He's American now.
delete. And they said, yeah, we're not going to sleep 3 nights this week. How many Stanley Cups or, Super Bowls do you think would be won? Like 0. You know what I mean? The other teams would smash you to pieces. And so this is the disconnect. We tell ourselves fairy tales. We don't look at other high-performing professions and say, well, what do you do for rest and recovery? We stay in our little box. We say, I don't want to hear anyone else. We're the best. If you challenge this, then obviously you're not a real man like me. And it's just complete BS. And then you go further up the chain, and now you've got chiefs saying, well, it's cheaper to just, hire overtime, pay overtime than to hire more people. Well, on that level, you just need to walk out of the office right now and leave your badge. Because if that's your leadership philosophy, I'm still going to go home at 5 o'clock every night and work a 40-hour week. But Jake, because it's cheaper than for me, which it isn't, by the way, and we'll show in a minute, I just need you to not be around your family for another 24 hours so I can pretend that we're saving the city money. I'm going to go home, but good luck with your next 24. It's insanity. Then you look at the sleep medicine side and the danger. Like 24 hours is pushing it, but it's doable. And that's why I think it is the right model for the fire service specifically, because we have houses with beds. And so as long as you can nap in between, because the moment you go from days to nights, and the people say, well, 12s are better. Like they're not. Look at the sleep science. The circadian rhythm can't catch up if you keep shifting. Whereas a 24, you and I ran 3 calls in the night. We still know day is day and night is night. So, it doesn't. So the answer is obviously more rest and recovery in the middle. But you think about the danger of, these 4896 departments at, 46 hours, 44 hours in, and they've been up pretty much the whole time, driving through traffic, lights and sirens. Your loved ones are in a minivan at the intersection. How safe is that? It's not. We know pure cognitive, research. Kurt Parsley says, the 24 hours without sleep is the same as a blood alcohol of 0.1. Well, that's 24. And that is most likely going to be a study that involves students that were sleeping the whole time until they did that study. Now, you think about a firefighter that's worked 10, 15 years, that 24, that's not 0.1 anymore. And now you're doing 48s, and mandatory overtimes and all these things. You've completely changed that. So it's dangerous, that it affects us on the longevity side. So the way that we actually fix it is to get people to start questioning the way that they've been taught to think, and then just lean into the other areas and ask these professions that, mirror us, and ask these departments that have made the change. And if they're saying, hey, this is the right way and it's working and look at the results, then it's really about humility, saying, look, the way that we're doing it just isn't working. We've got to try something different.
Hey there, gang. If you could do me a favor and just subscribe to the podcast, whatever platform you're listening it on. It makes such a big difference. It's a small thing you can do, boost the channel a ton. If you follow on social media, like and share the posts. If you don't follow on social media, please do. I would appreciate that. And more than anything, thanks for listening to the show. I hope you're getting something from it. This podcast is brought to you in part by Hikes Boots. You can tell a lot about a brand by the way they choose to advertise, and Hikes didn't ask me to say anything specifically. What they did was they sent me a couple pairs of boots. They sent me their Fire Eagle Air and their Fire Eagle Extreme, which is 2 structural firefighting boots. They also gave me the Rescue Extreme hazmat boot, which is crazy. In a world where we're used to wearing these giant orange galoshes, the Rescue Extreme is like a streamline station boot that's also chemical rated. Ridiculous. It just changes the way that you view what a hazmat boot could be forever. If you want more information, check it out at hikesusa.com. That's HAIXUSA.com, or check the show notes for the direct link. Rigaku. This episode is brought to you in part by Rigaku Analytical Devices, who are the folks that have been perfecting the 1064 nanometer ramen longer than a lot of us have even been doing hazmat. You know, they just launched their 4th generation handheld analyzer, the Icon X, and is built specifically for real world stuff hazmat teams deal with every day. We're talking about dirty powders, mixed materials, dyes, colors, and all the things that make other instruments throw a tantrum. And the 1064 nanometer laser means reduced fluorescence, so you get fast, reliable chemical ID in under 1 minute, instead of staring at a blank screen wondering what went wrong. And this new platform isn't just an upgrade, it's a whole new toolbox. It supports new accessories, including standoff analysis, so you can get answers without getting too close. And if you want an analyzer that's been evolving right alongside the hazmat world, check out Rigaku's newest ramen at rigakuanalytical.com. Or check the show notes. Hey, back to the show. How does a chief that understands it go to a council or a mayor that doesn't and plead the case? What's the framework to take the initiated, like, say, like, you do all this work on your department, or the chief is doing the work to understand this information, buy into the idea that this change is needed. How do they then go and translate that to someone completely on the outside and make it matter to them?
So here's what's sad. What should happen is, hey, this is what our firefighters are working. This is the impact that's having on their physical health, on their mental health, on their relationships. And the mayor and the city council members or the county council members would be like, well, that's awful. We get to enjoy this work week. That needs to change. Here's the budget. Now, doesn't seem to be the way it works out there. So let's try plan B. Plan B is, and let's use the West Coast as a perfect example. I'm actually about to do a video on this today. There's so many stories that have come out of the West Coast at the moment. LAFD's overtime budget, not operational, overtime budget the last 4 years was $1.2 billion.
Whoa.
We've got Californian battalion chiefs that have made $1 million in a year, of which I'm pretty sure 75% was overtime. I think their base was like 250, 300, whatever it was. You've got other stories, different departments, 600,000 a year. And so these agencies are up in arms. Wow, these firefighters are so overpaid, and they're missing the point. It's kind of like us saying we have the greatest schedule in the world. No, we don't. Look at the actual math. So what's actually happening is we have a massive, as Walt Dix pointed out, not so much recruitment crisis, we have a retention crisis, which is also then creating more of a recruitment crisis, because when I went, blindly in 2004, and admirably so, for all the right reasons, there was no information on all the negative side. Ladder 49 just came out. I just graduated EMT and Fire Academy, and you're just chomping at the bit. And then we're going through Hialeah's Crucible. We made it out of that, which is, an achievement in itself. That's all you're thinking about. Now, if you Google what's it like to be a firefighter, all the amazing stuff comes out. I mean, look at the USAR teams coming back from Venezuela, for example. I mean, it's just the greatest calling on the planet. But all the other stuff is coming out too. The cancers, the suicides, the testosterone depletion, the childhood diseases, all these things that we're seeing that is absolutely scientifically proven as a direct correlation. Not the only factor, but a massive contributing factor. So now these young people are going, well, wait a second, 56-hour week, mandatory overtime. Now you're at an 80-hour week. I don't want to be told I can't go home to my family. I value my time with my wife or my husband or my partner or whoever it is, and my kids. So I really wanted to do this fire service thing, but I don't know, I'm guessing I'm gonna have to go into welding. That's a shame. And I totally understand it. So now we go back to the point. Now we have a crisis that is creating so much wastage of taxpayers' money, and also wasting the money and delivering a lower level of service. Because you could be the greatest firefighter in the world. By the time you're on your third shift straight, 72 hours, you're a shadow of who you are, and you're a liability a lot of times to get to that call and start working out drug calculations or trying to do a primary search when you can't even see straight. So there is this massive amount of money that is downstream. So if you think about the cost it is to actually do a recruit class, a hiring class, the cadre, the background checks, the bunker gear, the paying into pensions. I mean, Here locally, they figured out if you put kids through school, it was $60,000 per recruit. Wow. If you think about the retention, all those people that you trained and then walk out the door, that taxpayers' money has just gone to a different city or county or state now. And so now you're back to, okay, well, let's put another class, let's hire more people. Then you think about the workers' comp premiums. A healthy, happy fire department is going to cost you less in insurance. It's just simple. We all know that. The healthier you are, the younger you are, the cheaper your insurance is. Then you go to the medical retirement. So all these people that get hurt before, their full 20 years. You think about line of duty death payments. And then you think about lawsuits. How many cities and counties have paid out millions because we've hit a civilian car in the rig, we pushed the wrong med, we were too aggressive with a patient, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now we're at tens and tens of millions. In a large agency like LAFD, you're at hundreds of millions. I mean, as we've seen. So then they say, well, we don't have the money. It's like, well, it's not that you don't have the money, you just don't have any money management sense. And I don't understand why the CFOs of these agencies aren't coming to the fire departments and saying, we need to do something differently. Because all you do right now, if you just punch in 2472 in Google, all my stuff will come up, amongst other things. So people are like, oh, I don't know what to do. It's like, well, you're not looking. You're clearly not looking, because in Florida alone, we have a complete wildfire of change happening here. So if you say, I don't know, or, 4896 is the best, or any of this ignorant stuff that I hear, and I say that deliberately because you're saying 56 hours is better than 42 hours. Like, come on, that means that you have not tried at all. You haven't looked. You haven't put it in ChatGPT. ChatGPT, I put the other day, what is the healthiest firefighter shift? 2472. There we go. Like, and how hard was that? That took you 7 seconds. So the point being, though, back to your question, though, because it's important, but I kind of like set the stage, is even though the health and performance of your personnel should be the absolute core of your management, it's the money that moves things. And so you come in and you say, this is how much we're losing as far as retention. We hire all these people that cost this much and they walk out the door. Marion County, where I live, and they just finally announced a switch to the 2472 within 3 years. 500 strong department. They lost 528 people in 5 years.
Wow.
So you times that by 60,000, that's $31.5 million.
Holy cow.
There's your money. You see what I'm saying? And LA and all these others, I mean, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. So you show where all the money is and you say, look, if we front load this money and we hire for another shift, everywhere around the country that's doing this, young people are starting to come back into this profession. And we're having lists that are deep, because there's a big difference between, I can still hire people, and choosing the top 10% of a list. Even from a liability point of view, one of my guests recently said it costs $500,000 to get rid of a bad employee, because they'll usually lean into some fake workers' comp claim, mental health, whatever it is. And that's there for the real ones. And let's be very, very clear. But we all know the people that ruin it for everyone because they play the game. They're just looking for an easy payout and then they're out again. Well, you get rid of those people mainly when you set the bar high in the recruitment process and you have an aggressive probation. You can't play the game for a year. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So you front load that money that you're already spending. Now you've got 4 full shifts. So the next time you have a hurricane, a tornado, an earthquake, a wildfire, that's another entire shift you get to lean into. If you do need to, have more overtime filled because of whatever, well, if you and I work on A shift, well, then we get asked, okay, well, can you do an OT or a trade on C shift? So we never do a 48. Mm-hmm. So, this is how you keep people, healthy. So, but it's the money, to your point, that really is going to move the needle. And it shouldn't be, but it is. So when you ask people to just, all right, go find out how much do we spend on recruitment? What does our list look like now compared to 10 years ago? How many people have left prematurely? And then, if there are any significant, medical retirements, how many people we got off on workers' comp at the moment? What about lawsuits? You're going to have all these, line items that you can point to and say, there's the money. And if we are fully staffed with 4 shifts, all of these are going to drop dramatically. And so you're not only then going to, invest in the money you were wasting. After that, you're going to start saving money hand over fist. And that's the money for hiring a physical therapist, mental health access, more gyms in the stations, a sauna, whatever the other things that you're looking, which then amplifies it. And you couple this with a fitness standard, which is a whole nother conversation. And now you're doubling down on the health of the first responder. Will revolutionize health and performance. But the first thing is just having the courage to say what we're doing isn't working. Mm-hmm. And if you say that you've got people in the seats, I say to you, what kind of people compared to 15 or 20 years ago? Mm-hmm. And it's a different standard of candidate. No disrespect to people who got hired more recently, because there are obviously some great people in there. But when you have 1,000 people to test and you take 30, is very different than when you have 30 people testing and you take 30. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot.
No, it's good. How does someone, so say so many departments I'm familiar with are like barely treading water. Like they're like at all-time call volumes with minimal staffing and they're facing cuts. How does a department that's like barely keeping their head above the water try to revolutionize their entire response model and schedule?
It goes back to the same thing. Yeah, my question is this: where were you at 20 years ago? Where were you at 15 years ago? Now, one of the significant events that happened, what was it? 18 years ago, is that right? Was the 2008 crash, and a lot of cuts were made, and nothing was returned back to the way it should have been. So that's another kind of origin story for a lot of the understaffing. But a lot of people say to me, well, first we just want to, we want to get enough to have 4 people on the rig, and then we're going to look at 24/72. And I'm telling them, well, look, you can't even hire enough for 3 people on the rig. What makes you think these people are going to come out of thin air to you to add this 4th person? So you're better off fixing the thing that is broken, that is stopping people from wanting to work for you or stopping people from leaving you. Fix that first. And then when you have this, massive uptick in recruitment, well, now you can start adding that 4th person as well. With the budget issues, we're drowning. It's like, well, why do you think you're drowning? Because you're so inefficient the way that you're working these people, and they're breaking and they're leaving, which is costing you a lot of money. So it always comes back to, you've got to fix the thing that's broken. And I tell people, look, sometimes that might involve in telling, your city or your county, look, we're going to need more money up front. Because if I'm going to build a school, guess what? I'm going to need some money up front. And then after that, we're going to teach kids for 20 years before we need to look at, upgrading or rebuilding again. So that upfront investment pays dividends down the road. But if you're drowning, it's because of, you're doing something wrong. I mean, I hate to be blunt, but it is. If you're a great leader and you've been progressive and you've got your finger on the pulse, okay, what are other departments that aren't drowning doing? How are we different? Do we need to do a penny tax? Whatever it is. That is how you stay ahead of it. But if you are like, well, that will never happen, they'll never go for it, then that's completely dismissive, and you haven't wanted the change. So it all starts with accepting the way we're doing it isn't working. Because if 10 years ago you had, even if you're a small department, you only hire a class of 3, but you had 70 candidates usually every time, and now you've got, like, locally here 5. A number of stories I've heard from departments now, smaller ones, because obviously these numbers are easier to witness. Like, we had 5 people we had to hire. We had 12 people apply. Only 11 showed up for the test, and only 6 actually qualified for the position, passed the testing. So they basically took everyone pretty much. And that's so different. So we know, this is what kills me. We used to be in a place where people would move states to try and get hired. People would try for years. They would test. Something the other day, one of my guests said they put in, I think it was 70 apps. And it took, several years to be hired as a firefighter. That's how it used to be until, arguably only about 10 years ago, certainly 15. And so that's how, we've got amnesia of where we used to be. We talk about this as though it's some unicorn fight and rainbows. It's like, no, we just want to go back to how it was before everyone realized what was going on, and it started dissuading people from coming, and it got worse and worse and worse, and the mandatory went up, and therefore recruitment retention went down. And so all we got to do is fix the things that are broken. And yes, it will take some money up front, but you will save that money downstream. And if you are really worth your salt in a financial perspective, then that will make sense to you. And if it's just looking good in a budget year, then you obviously are in the wrong position. So you need to step down, go do whatever department you're actually good at and let someone who understands the economics take over. But yeah, if you are drowning, the question is why. And I guarantee if it's the fire service that there's inefficiencies in the way that you treat your people. And if you invest in a fourth shift, which we have seen in Florida all over the place now, sick time goes down, camaraderie and the culture has increased. Now you've got people saying, oh man, you've got to come work for us. It's an amazing job. So now your recruitment goes up because people working in that department are actually advocating. That's the best recruitment tool you have is your own people. So, but it all starts with look in the mirror and go, what we did didn't work. Now, if you've always struggled and you're out in the middle of Idaho somewhere, a population of, 2,000, I get there's some anomalies, but most of the people that we're talking about are suburban or urban departments that absolutely can fix the issue, but it begins with humility and ends with courage.
So to kind of put a bow on that statement, would you say definitively that the biggest reason for the recruitment downtick is the proliferation of the quote unquote negative information? It is negative, but it also is just the truth, right? The proliferation of the honest truth of the fire service is the biggest catalyst for the downturn in recruitment, or what would you put your thumb on in terms of that?
Yeah, I mean, like I've pointed out on the show before, when I was testing and you put in, it wasn't even Google then, Ask Jeeves or whatever the search engine was, all they had for fire service jobs was the thing called like the golden nuggets, how to ace your, oral interview and things like that. There was nothing on any of this stuff. And it's a great thing that we've identified. Let's go back to that Jenga tower. If we just ignore it, another suicide, another overdose, another cancer, they keep dying. You don't change anything. Nothing is going to get better. So it's an ugly, messy process to start looking at what's wrong with it. And this is what irks me with people saying, oh, you shouldn't talk negative. It's like, well, you should, because that's how you fix things. Listen to our veterans of GWAT. You listen to the ones that were actually there, boots on the ground, talking about the way they withdrew from Afghanistan, talking about the lies around weapons of mass destruction, and how even though they know they made a difference, what was it all for? And military recruiting is down because it's a lack of trust. And it's the same with the fire service. If it's a just sit down, shut up, get back to work mentality, that's not how you forge, healthy, happy workforce. And if you look at some of the most successful models in the business space, a lot of corporate companies around the world have gone to a 4-day work week. Same productivity, more innovation, more efficiency. And then obviously you can imagine a healthier, happy workforce because they get a 3-day weekend. Getting the same exact work done, because we all know if you've ever done a desk job, you just kind of, the inbox is always full. It's a hamster wheel. And if, Google, they have gyms, they have free cafeterias with healthy food, like they invest in their people. They have autonomy. They get to, they say, just get the work done. You can do it from here, you can do it from home. And so, treating adults like adults and showing people that you value them and showing them that you're going to back them up. You're not going to throw them under the bus the moment it becomes political or whatever the thing is. Those are extremely important. And organizational betrayal, that's a whole other conversation as far as that and mental health and how that's tied to so many of our suicides. So if you can show that it truly is a tribe, it truly is that brotherhood and sisterhood, and people say it's dead, it's not dead. It's not. It's just that it's that term silent majority again. You've got a lot of loud voices that have, saying, oh, it's dead, and there's all this selfishness. We just got to take it back. That's all. But the way that I've kind of lost my thought process now, but it all comes down to if you, like I said, can address the things that are broken, this build it, they will come. And there's no question in my mind that when young people see that we care again, because people say, oh, we can't get there. There's not enough firefighters now. There are, but it's a revolving door in these departments. So they keep bouncing from department to department. But also there's a lot of people that just dissuaded because when they Googled it, oh, there we go, I found myself back. It says all this great stuff and all this bad stuff. and we've been telling, my generation's been telling our kids about emotional intelligence, about the importance of time with family, about physical fitness. And so if this job is like, yeah, it's a great job because we have smoothbore nozzles, which that was on a recruitment poster I saw the other day. Like if you've got to use that as a recruitment tool, that's like plumbers saying, we got wrenches.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Come for the wrenches. Yeah.
But but to the point, when you fix those things and you show people you care and you're about high performance, because none of these previous shifts forge performance, they take performance away. You will have young people excited again, and so that negative messaging is important as long as you couple it with solutions. I think that's the real takeaway. If you're just bitching, that's a whole different thing. But if you're saying, look, here are these solutions in all these other industries or all these other countries, all we have to do, or in this case, in this state of Florida, this is how they've done it. This is the success. That is then, the biggest takeaway, because the goal is not to break the fire service down. It's like, you have to break it down in a kind of boot camp type way and then rebuild it again. But we have to debunk all the myths and the fairy tales that we've told each other to then get back to, okay, what is reality? Almost like a distorted mind we were talking about with suicide. We've kind of got an element of that in the fire service. And I want to be very compassionate and empathetic. The reason why a lot of our men and women can't critically think about this topic is because they are so beat down and sleep deprived and burnt out. And we all saw in COVID, you get people tired and you get people stressed, their critical thinking goes out the window. Well, it's either vaccines fix everything or it's all a Chinese conspiracy. Yeah. And in the middle was the normal people that were it's a real virus, and if the healthier the population, the better the outcome. Yeah. But that was lost in the white noise. So massive kind of rambling monologue to your answer. But yeah, it's not the negative messaging that is dissuading people. It's the real elements of the way that we're worked are front and center now. And people are having really intelligent conversations about the shifts, about sleep deprivation, about mental health. And this young generation is getting all of that information and it's shifting their decision making, because other trades, of which Gen Z are leaning heavily into the trades now, they're taking our potential firefighters because they have addressed those in a much better way than we have.
Mm-hmm. And I do see this as a transitional period. I think that someday we'll look back at this block of time in the fire service as this, like the great transition of like understanding the problems. And right now we just happen to be living through the change. But I think we like the illumination is so heavily on the problems right now that I would imagine inevitably they will become solved. It's just how many years, how many decades maybe potentially have to persist inside of this system before they're resolved. And I imagine in the course of my career, at the very least in the course of my lifetime, we will see the great transition occur and a better fire service because of the work like people like you are doing to raise the alarms for these issues. So as we start to kind of wind down, which is a big statement, I want to put you on the spot and try to squeeze out all the knowledge I can in a relatively concise manner from your wisdom that you've accumulated over all these episodes. Okay. So now, Chief James Geering, right? You are the chief of the United States Collective Fire Department, right? You have total autonomy of the budget and decisions. What are the 5 changes you make to your department for the better?
Step 1 is definitely the work week, 100%. So 24/72, and it's when people talk about a 42-hour work week, and this is a fantastic conversation, the fact that people are even asking which one. But if you look at the video on this recently, if you look at all the different shift shapes that they have, the 1 on, 1 off, 1 on, 5 off, and the Boston schedule and all these other ones, 24/72 is the one that every single 24-hour shift you have is 72-hour recovery period. So that is the gold standard, scientifically, economically, all the things. So that would be the first one. Fitness standards. When I ask my special operations guests, when I ask my ocean lifeguards, are you held to a fitness standard? they're like, well, of course. And then they're blown away that police, fire, EMS aren't. And if you want to forge performance and longevity, you have to have a fitness standard, unless you've got such a great culture that you don't need to have an actual standard that everyone in your department just gets it, which is the real ideal, that you don't need to even test. But I was at the Disney department. The hotel next to me was a 30-story hotel. So 100 pounds of gear, high-rise strip, the hose, tool, and 2 spare bottles is 100 pounds of gear, 30 stories up, before you then go to work, forcing doors, searching, bringing the person down. So to say we don't need fitness standards is insane. And shame on anyone in the union, in admin, who's fought fitness standards. That should never have even been we shouldn't even have this conversation. It should have been there. And you imagine an ocean lifeguard saying, well, I don't need to learn how to swim or maintain. I swam in the academy. And your kid drowns because the chunky monkey on the lifeguard stair, just tapped out after the 3rd wave. It's unacceptable. So be very harsh about that, but also be very fair that you have to create an environment that forges performance. So you have to have a work week that then allows someone to maintain a fitness standard back to the 24/72. And of course, a fitness standard doesn't mean you put it in tomorrow and fire everyone that can't meet the standard. You give them, a year on ramp or whatever to get to where they need to be, and, peer fitness trainers and all the things. So, but having someone who's scared of working out, think about that. You're scared of being tired, entering a fire with you. You're scared of being tired, but you're going to go in a fire with me, and we're going to, be interior and God knows how many hundreds of degrees, and have to drag hose and drag people and climb stairs and breach. And a treadmill scares you. We've got to have a big boy conversation about that too. One big thing that I would do is at the front door, as importantly as PT would be mental PT. So, when someone gets hired, firstly, having a conversation saying, the fact that you are here means that when you were young, you've been through some shit. And I want you to know that that is an asset. But if you lock it in a box and you shove it down, it will rear its ugly head one day. And there's a Mexican proverb, they tried to bury us. They didn't know that we were seeds. And I love that. It's such a great analogy. So by understanding that the post-traumatic growth of identifying things that were struggles, traumas, working through them, that forges resilience, that forges a higher level of performance, more empathy, that is an exciting conversation if you have it on day one in a fire academy. And you have X amount of counseling sessions, and you can talk about baseball, the weather, but it will obviously evolve to deeper conversations. But when you frame that in a performance lens, all of a sudden it makes that work exciting, and everything else, yoga and breath work and meditation, all these other things, because you listen to the elite performers, the Delta operators, the SAS, they are using that stuff to perform at a high level. Well, that stuff also helps on the mental health side. So it's a win-win. So that would be another one. Obviously the strength and conditioning side would be pertinent and relative to what we actually do. There's a disconnect sometimes. Either you've got someone with stretchy bands and Swiss balls, or you've got someone saying you need a deadlift 700 pounds. There's a middle ground of, fire service specific movements coupled with accessory work. So really, forging that tactical athlete. There would be, I think I'm on number 4 now, physical therapy. So injury prevention, prehab, and rehab. So if you do get hurt, you have a rehabilitation program that's focused for a tactical athlete, not the geriatric community like I was, where, okay, now I understand what James and Jake might have to do on day 1 at 10 a.m. on their first shift back. And now all of a sudden, 100 pounds of gear, and I'm climbing 30 flights of stairs to get a 250-pound patient that we're going to have to bring down. That requires the PT, physical therapy side to be at a high level as well. So that would be that one. And then I think also just mentorship programs. I'm so, enamored with the local one here. You want to get young people excited about this profession, and you want to address a diversity issue, then create a mentorship program that has 0 barrier to entry, that challenges young people from all parts of your community to come to a local fire station 3 times a week and experience what it's like to be a firefighter. You're going to have 3 types show up. You're going to have one that says, you know what, I tried it and I don't want to be a firefighter. Fantastic. You check that off your list before you committed all this money to a fire academy, or you got 6 months into a probation. Absolute win. And you learned some life skills. You got number two, I do want to be a firefighter. I'm not there yet. Great. Well, then we'll keep working with you. We'll get you to help, lose some of that weight. We'll get you stronger, whatever. And then you have three, the people that you send through the mentorship program, and they're ready. And then now they're prepared for the fire academy, and then off they go and get hired. And there's scholarships and all those kind of things. So that would be the fifth one. I think if I throw one more as well, we talked about the on-ramp, off-ramp. Same exact conversation with our retirees. That a year or so prior, that you're already talking about the transition, and they're getting classes, education, whatever it looks like, on some of the challenges. Look, you've been part of this amazing tribe. This is your identity. This has been your purpose. When you take that uniform off, you don't cease to be of value to society. And, you are still a member of this, but you've got to find something that adds value as you progress, that you can go into next. And that's what I love about 2472. People are like, oh, if we just give them more time off, they'll just work more. Well, if you can't work at the station because you're fully staffed, now all of a sudden you're teaching hazmat class, your personal training, your landscaping, and now you forge this second, identity, career, etc., for that retiree to transition into, which is amazing for mental health as well. So those, I think that's five or six, but those would be the ones I think that we would just revolutionize the fire service. And these are all elements that we are aware of. It's just simply finally saying we're going to make changes. And as you can see with the overlap, you've got a healthy work week, which allows you to have a fitness standard. And now you've got mental health access, and now you're just amplifying the health. And then my goal is 15, 20 years ago, the next generation of firefighters will sit around the kitchen table and go, did you know what mandatory overtime was? That's what they used to do 20 years ago. Can you believe that? They had all these suicides, they had all these cancers. Like, oh God, I'm so glad I wasn't working 20 years ago. So as I've said to people, I stood on the shoulders of giants, from the bunker gear to the SCBA, to the extrication tools, to the rope rescue, to all the medicines, the paramedicine, innovations. And so operationally, I didn't really have anything to offer. I wasn't the guru in any specific area. Where I feel that we can really make the biggest dent is that now we can help the people in the uniform, which wasn't done in that era. So that is how we really leave our mark and leave it better than we found it.
So with that, as we kind of look to close out here, I do want to, you're far from done. I know that you have a lot more ambition in you and you want to accomplish a lot more things. But if we look retrospectively up to this point, what makes you proud? What sparks your joy? What sparks your ambition? And what legacy do you feel you've left? And how does that make you feel?
Hands down, first, what makes me proud is my son, and I've got a bonus boy, a stepson as well, and then my wife. I mean, that's it. That was, when you look at my story, that was what always came first. So even though, like Anaheim, for example, I left my dream job, but it was for family. So watching those two young men now and the struggles that they've been through and the post-traumatic growth that they've experienced and the kind, compassionate human beings that they are, I could die today and I know, that's it. I've already peaked, as it were. From this mission, not only what we did in uniform, because 14 years, that was a lot of lives that we affected. I was a black cloud. If you had a cardiac arrest, I was not the medic for you. Everyone died. And it wasn't that I didn't take my job seriously. I got the GI bleeds and the AAAs and all the things. But, there's a lot of, whether it was just the kindness and compassion in the back to bed call, or the homeless, man or woman, or if it was, the pre-codes and, some of the fires and things like that. So that makes me proud. But I think the biggest thing, and this goes back again to the identity piece and people that transition out, is what really makes me proud is I never forgot the mission. I was a kind little boy. I lost my way a little bit as a teen, found my way back again, put on a uniform, served selflessly, transitioned out the other side. But the goal was always to stop people dying and stop people from suffering. And what I am really proud now is every time someone sends me a message saying, yeah, now usually it's a 24/72. Sometimes it's, that they went to a psychedelic retreat that they heard on the podcast or whatever, but something related to the mission that's still going. And you now know that that one person or maybe that whole department are going to effectively help tens of thousands of people, and that you were just a little piece of that puzzle that helped move that forward. It's the same thing as, as running a call. It is the same mission. Like I tell people, it's just a different costume now. So trying to retain that moral compass, especially early days when there was so much opposition and like nasty opposition. And luckily, I've kind of been gifted with a Teflon skin where, if you know something's right, it's just right. It's not an opinion. I've had the humility to ask all these people and they've all said, yes, this is a thing. Then it's like, okay, but it's weathering the storm. So that makes me proud too, to have the endurance to suffer through a lot of the resistance early on. And here we are now. And like literally last night, Polk County, which is south of Orlando, just announced that they are just waiting now to sign it, but they're going to be going to a 24/72. That's amazing, because I know that so many mothers and fathers are going to be home with their kids, not only when they're supposed to, i.e. no mandatories, but now even more frequently, and be at more baseball matches and, ballet recitals, and the kids are going to turn to the audience and they will be there. They wouldn't have been told they couldn't go because they're mandatory. So I'm proud of a lot. I really am. And it's not a pat on my back. It's a collective movement, because everything that I've achieved is also all the, like-minded people in their departments. And I'm pulling from all this information, these guests that have come on the podcast for free. So it's never me, but collectively, this community, I'm proud of us. I really am.
Mm-hmm. So we've looked backwards. Now let's look forwards. What is next for James Geering?
So the next thing, I wrote a book, I think it was 6 years ago now, One More Light, which I took stories from my career, but it's not a biography. Every chapter is a takeaway. So sleep deprivation, mental health, injury, deaths on the road. And so nonfiction. And, I love that book. Josh Brolin actually wrote the forward for that one. I did the audio book recording. He actually did the forward, which makes me laugh because you got one of the best voices in Hollywood, and I narrate the rest of my squeaky ass English voice. And then a few years later, I wanted to write a story, and the goal was to not only write a fiction, and it's, as you can imagine, partly fictional, most of it's true, but also ultimately to get it on the screen. So that was called Kinder, which came out a year and a half ago now. Again, narrated the audio book. So now you've got podcast medium, you got written, like paper books, you've got Kindle, you've got audio books. And so screen is the last thing. So now I'm developing a very unique TV show that will really pull from both books. There'll be a scripted, actual series that I think will finally show the public what the firefighters and firefighters / EMT paramedics really do, without the soap operas, and the Disneyfication of, a lot of the shows that you see out there. But then it will be coupled with another project that will then pull from that show and disseminate information that people can actually use themselves. So every person in their living room will be like, well, shit, I could do that today. And so we start healing on a macro level there. So that's what I'm hoping. It's in some people's hands now. It's still early stages, but it is in, some production companies at the moment. So I'm just waiting for that first person who really gets it, that wants to use television to make the world better, and I believe that's the case. It's like a kind of reverse 1984. Orwell talked about how the screen can be used to divide us, and we've seen that so much. But I mean, what a beautiful example with the World Cup. The screen has shown us, like, oh, by the way, like, we're all just people. As I heard someone say the other day, the World Cup made us realize that we're all just cousins at a play date, and all our parents have gone out for the weekend. And it's true. You know what I mean? Yeah. Oh, we're actually all the same, and we all get on, and we don't hate each other. Mm-hmm. So with that same vein, you get a show that captivates people, and then you give them the tools to forgive themselves for the things they've been blaming themselves for, and then the tools to actually start growing from whatever they've been through, whether it's, weight gain, or whether it's a mental health challenge, or whatever it is. That's what I want to do. So it's a culmination of everything up to this point, but there's some awful television and film that gets made with millions and millions of dollars of budget, And I don't think that our story's really been told yet. You know, some have done a good job in certain areas, but, you know, let's say like Rescue Me first series was great, but it's not the EMS side. You know, Asphalt City, great show on the EMS, but it's super dark and it's not, you know, uplifting. It just makes you think, oh, every medic's going to kill themselves. Okay. So I feel like, you know, the real fire service, and especially through our eyes, the way that we see society, the politicians and news can tell us that X, Y, and Z is going on, but ask your first responders. They're the ones that actually see it, you know? So yeah, so that is what's next. Watch this space. It'll come hell or high water. It's going to happen.
From James. That's awesome. I'm excited to see where it goes with it. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm proud to call you a friend, and I'm super excited to see what's coming up next, and hopefully all these ideas come to fruition, and hopefully you can make another 12 or 1300 episodes and keep spreading that wisdom across the world. I appreciate you.
Yeah, well, I want to say thank you again. I mean, you know, I know you said you're up to episode 80-ish, but I mean, you do this really well. You really do. It's always a great conversation. You're an amazing guest as well. But, you know, just interesting questions and letting the person, you know, go through their full thought process. And, you know, I know what you're putting out there as well on the hazmat side is amazing. So I'm honored to call you a friend. Thank you so much. I'm humbled to come on here. And yeah, looking forward to our next chat.
For sure. Thank you, sir.